Welcome to the Point Guard podcast, a platform for fascinating and informative interviews that seek to transform minds and transform lives. Good evening to everyone listening in and watching in London and across the UK and around the world. I'm your host, Calvin Wilson, barrister, former senior Crown prosecutor, and the founder of the Point Guard podcast, as well as Code Red TV. Our topic for today is Stop Traumatizing Our People. It deals with stop and search. And what we'll be doing, we'll be taking a very unique approach to this topic in this month of Black History Month. The theme will be Black Health and Wellness, Time for Change, Action, Not Words. And today we have our guests, Ruth South and Adrian Roberts. They are the authors of The Little Black Book, a handbook for the BEAM community about interacting with the police. You'll hear much more about that as we go through the course of this evening. Also, as our guest would be Chief Constable Dennis Murray of the Thames Valley Police, and I'm sure that you want to hear what he wants to say in terms of reaction to the contents of the book. So the burning question for all of us today or tonight is, are we, as the Black community in the UK, are we on the road to making a significant dent or indeed ending the vexatious issue of stop and search and the trauma that is causing to our community as we continue to suffer at the hands of actions by the police? So first things first, let's get started with our guests. And I'll ask our guests, Ruth South and Adrian Roberts, to introduce themselves. And then after, I'll ask Chief Constable Dennis Murray to introduce himself as well. Ruth, you have the floor. Ladies first.
Thank you very much, Calvin. And I'm very happy to be here with you, and thanks for the invitation. I think it's a time now where, as you said, we need to change the narrative to make our lives, the acronym stop traumatizing our people, to make it a reality that we can actually start to breathe a little more easily than we are now in our daily lives. So, as you said, my name is Ruth South, and I'm the founder of Communities Against Racism enterprise. And it's set up to actually do things like this, Calvin. So I'm glad that you are addressing stop and search. I am the founder. It was set up in 2020, timely time with, again, a police incident with George Floyd. So all this ties nicely into it. I'm a mother of 5 lovely, lovely children, and I've got a 6th one. So hopefully I'll meet her soon. Not met her yet. And so it's very much a part of my life, this stop and search, because I've got 3 sons and they're growing up in a community where they don't feel safe. So this is what I'm all about, stop and search, hence Communities Against Racism.
So Adrian, Ruth talks about the catalyst for writing the book, and I know you have a particular experience for starting off on this journey, and it involved a bit of trauma, mental anguish for yourself, for your son, particularly because he was the victim of this action by the police. So can you tell us why you're involved with this project along with your co-author, Ruth?
Oh, hello, Calvin. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me. Well, basically, I'm a member of the public. I'm a concerned parent and have also been a victim of police injustice in different ways as a pedestrian and as a driver. And but nothing that happened to me was as traumatic as what happened to my son. And it was that motivated me to seek Ruth's help, and then we worked together for this. Well, we don't like to call it a book; we call it a manual, and we call it the A.K.I.P book, or the Little Black Book. We were thinking of China and Chairman's Mao Little Red Book, so we thought of something that would stick in the people's minds. But A.K.I.P is an acronym that we use, So I can tell you about that when the time comes.
Well, let's get right into it. What does the acronym A.K.I.P mean?
Well, what we've noticed is that when there are various presentations like on Black history and different things like this and justice and rights and Black Lives Matter, or I'd often heard the term knowledge is power. And yet they say things like, if you want to hide something from a black man, you put it in a book. And so the idea of knowledge is power. But to me, it seemed incomplete. And that comes out in the beginning of the book, the manual. And that is that knowledge being useful, very useful, is of no use whatsoever until it is applied. And so we have the idea that if you can know all there is to know about how a car works, until you get in that car and switch on the engine and apply that knowledge, the car's not going anywhere. So we decided to add the letter A. And so instead of knowledge is power, we believe that applied knowledge is power.
And your book seeks to empower people to deal with the issue of stop and search. Now, we'll get into the details of the book shortly, but I want to ask you a particular question, which is the book is directed to the BEAM community. And that's somewhat unique because we are, accustomed to the BAME community, Black minority ethnic people. So you say BEAM. What does it mean?
Right, BEAM means, I mean, it's an acronym. We all talk about acronyms, and it's like BAME was an acronym. Actually, it didn't even start out with BAME. It was BME for Black Minority Ethnic. And then it migrated to BAME, Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic. And in the climate today, 21st century climate, in 2022, well, it wasn't before 2022, people were saying we don't like the acronym BAME because it's very derogatory and it's very divisive. You know, some Asians were saying, we are lumped together. The blacks were saying that we're lumped together, but we were looking for individuality, but wanting to be inclusive. So my sister and I, we were just talking one day, and we said, why don't we change this BAME to something else? And we were going around, and she was in her car and I was in my kitchen. And then, as God would have it, because I'm a believer, my sister was in her car, the light shone through, and she said, what about BEAM? BEAM and BAME are just the names switched around. So BEAM came to the fore by that. And the reason why BEAM is so, as you said, unique, Calvin, and you're right, 4 letters, same 4 letters, but you switch them around, we get BEAM, and it stands for Black, Brown, British, African or Caribbean or Asian, well, let's say Indian. And then you've got the E for European, which is Irish, Romany, Eastern European, Romanian, which is still European. Britain is still in Europe. So we went on to the A, which is African, Asian, Arab, Chinese. You've got the Arabs, and you've got the Afro-Caribbean. And then the one that we actually loved was we changed the minority to mixed, because the mixed were actually totally disregarded as though they were persona non grata. So we said, no, we have to include the mix, which was now no longer minority, but mixed. And we piloted it, and a young man said, and he was mixed, and he was saying for a long time, people kept saying I was black, but I knew that I had mixed in me, I had some European in me. And he said, now I feel homogenized. And I didn't know that this young man felt like that. Imagine, Calvin and Adrian, how many mixed people feel like that, but didn't have a voice because they were not part of BAME. So BEAM is now inclusive of everyone. No one gets left out. It's a global term.
Which is very welcoming to all communities.
Yes,
absolutely.
I mean, if I could just say that the wonderful thing that Ruth and her sister came up with this inspiration. The idea of beam, psychologically, that whole subliminally, the idea of light, a beam shining, a light on the situation. It's so positive. And the term BAME, Ruth once said to me that it was, because she studies these type of things, the connections with other words that are negative, like blame and shame and inflame and lame, all these negative terms, all similar to BAME. And so she had said that she wanted to take it away from that and make it positive. And we were just blown away by what she'd done.
Okay, so can I, if we can just temporize just a little bit whilst I'm bringing our third guest, Chief Constable or Assistant Chief Constable Dennis Murray. He's on the line with us. And so Dennis, welcome.
Well, welcome. Can you hear me, Calvin? Okay.
Yes, we're hearing you loud and clear.
I've just had a text from somebody saying, "Can you check your microphone?" So thank you for having me, Adrian. Good to see you again.
Hello, Dennis. Lovely to see you. Yeah. Good.
Well, Dennis, thank you for coming. And I asked Ruth and Adrian to introduce themselves. So can I ask you to give us a brief idea as to who you are and why you're connected to this program?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an Assistant Chief Constable with Thames Valley Police. I've been in the police service now for 32 years nearly. And I originally joined with Northamptonshire Police. And then I went on to comment as a Chief Superintendent to the British Transport Police, where I met Adrian as a result of a complaint about Adrian's son being stopped and searched. And then moved off to join Thames Valley Police as an Assistant Chief Constable. But during all of that time, one of the things that I've kind of specialised in is working with seldom heard communities, focusing in on improving stop and search, use of force and police powers. So in Northamptonshire, I reduced disproportionality in stop and search against black people from 10 times more likely to be stopped to 2.1. By working with the community, and the only reason I didn't get the chance to move it lower was because I moved off to the British Transport Police and helped them to restructure their work. But I've also done work with Police Service Northern Ireland, West Mercia as a result of the Daly and Atkinson death and murder actually, where an officer was convicted. And then came to Thames Valley Police and now working with the team to look at how Thames Valley Police are dealing with things. I lead for the race action plan for Thames Valley Police. I sit on the National Race, Religion and Belief portfolio for the National Police Chiefs Council, and I set up and created and chair the National Police Diversity and Inclusion Consortium, which brings together all police forces to talk about how they can make improvements in this area. But my background as an individual, I'm Anglo-Indian. My parents came here in the 60s from Chennai and settled here. Probably had my first experience of racism and negative experiences with policing when my brother was 7. He was bullied at school, held down, jumped upon, and had a nervous breakdown, was found under the stairs painting himself white because he thought that would solve his issues. And at that time in the 70s, the police service said, it's school ground bullying, we can't do anything about it. So you can imagine when I said I was joining the police, my mum wasn't impressed, threatened to disown me. But my view was the only way to change this is to be inside, get into the system and climb to a position where you can change things. And 30 years later, here I am. I work for the 5th largest police force in the UK, largest non-metropolitan force in the UK, leading on the race action plan, violence against women and girls, and everything crime and criminal justice for Thames Valley.
So, well, we applaud your achievements, the longevity of your service, and your experiences are almost akin to all of us. We are immigrants to this country, most of us, and we have suffered, the trauma that your family would have suffered. And so, Adrian, I want to take it back to you and your experience with your son's experience, and what led you to be involved with this project with Ruth. We're gonna have to pick it up a bit because we have a limited time. We have it's now 19 past the hour, and we have a few more minutes to go, maybe 41 minutes to go. and we have a lot of ground to cover. So, Adrian, tell me about the trauma your son experienced and how it affected you, how it affected him, your family, and what do you intend to do about it even now?
Well, the experience of my son and myself has been bookended by my experience. Back in the 70s, I was coming back from a camp, a summer camp, and I was carrying a suitcase full of clothes. I was walking through Croydon because I'm from London originally. And as I was heading for the train station, I was stopped by two policemen who made me put my case on the floor and open it. And they rummaged through all my laundry. I don't know what they were looking for, but they just on the street, opened it, rummaged through, found nothing, and closed it back up. And as they went off, one of them turned around to me and said, and wagged his finger and said, "And stay out of trouble." And that has always been with me. And then I come to this point now with what happened to my son on Wednesday, the 15th of 2020. He was travelling from Nottingham, from our house to Nottingham, and on the way from there to Grantham. And while he was on the train, he had bought a ticket, as the young people do, often but with their telephone. But his phone had run out of juice at the time that the ticket conductor had come along the train. And so he asked him for his ticket, and he said that, well, the battery's run out on my phone. And so the ticket officer said, "Okay, right, well, what you need to do is wait here while the train was moving." He then disappeared for about 10 minutes and came back and said, "When you get to your destination, you need to go over the bridge at the train station and go to the ticket office, and they'll sort you out." So he thought nothing more of it. When he arrived at the train station in Grantham, he saw, as soon as he set foot on the ground, that all the other passengers were being shepherded in a certain direction. And he then thought nothing of it. You know, being a young teenager, he just got on, headed for the bridge, and went up the stairs. And as soon as he got onto the bridge, there he was accosted by two police officers who showed him their badges and said, "We are police officers. You need, from British Transport Police. You need to hold fire and stop there." And then 5 police officers came from one end of the bridge, and 5 came from the other. So there were 10 in all who were physically at him, and they held him up against the wall on the bridge, and they did a search, going, down his legs and his arms and everything. And he then tried to get his phone out to video, and one police officer brought out his pepper spray, put it in front of his eyes, and said, "If you don't put your phone away, I'm going to use this straight away." So they took his phone away and they put it in a plastic bag. They searched him, externally, over his clothes and everything, and they had his legs wide apart, and he was in a lot of pain with one of his legs. They had forced it open, and his legs wide open. They found nothing. So 4 police officers then escorted him, and this was in the middle of COVID. They escorted him to a lift, and they took him downstairs. No one had masks on. In the middle of, when we were told at that time, we all needed to wear masks. And he was taken to the toilets on the train station, the gents' toilets. And he was there made to remove his clothes from the waist down, including his shoes and socks. Now, a few days before this, he had gone down, he had stepped on a nail. It had gone through his heel. And so he had a plaster on for an open wound. They made him remove that. Now, I don't mean I'm speaking openly. I mean, in gents' toilets, there are urinals where men stand and relieve themselves, and sometimes they miss. So who knows what was on the floor? So he's standing on the floor in bare feet with an open wound and his clothes to the side, and they made him bend over. They totally humiliated him. They found nothing in the first instance, and they found nothing in this instance. And they they told him to put the plaster back on at first, and he refused. And so they gave him his clothes, which they had folded up and put neatly on the floor. And he was told to get dressed, and then he could go. And when he got dressed, he was close to tears at this point, tears of frustration and humiliation. He then went down the stairs and exited. And as he was exiting the train station, another group of police officers were there with dogs. And they then said to him that he needed to subject himself to a third search. And he said, "But I've already been searched on the bridge." They said, you need to subject yourself to a third search with these dogs, or we will then subject you to a fourth, which he assumed would be like what happened to him in the toilets. So he allowed the dog to sniff around him while they've already found nothing on him in any part of his clothing or when they made him down. And then they said, right, you can go. And he said, as he was leaving, he saw the other police officers in cars, because this is British Transport Police, and they were all grinning and smiling as he left. When he came home that evening, he told us about it. And it absolutely shocked us. I was so angry. And I could see it in him. He had nowhere he could place his anger. So I complained to the IOPC, and I complained to the Black Police Officers Association, and when they looked at the case, I followed it the whole way through. I was phoning up and emailing and following it at every point, and they came to the conclusion, after all that, there was no case to answer. So you can imagine when you feel like this, totally humiliated, nowhere to turn, and so angry, I thought, how can I? He hates the police. That's how he was at the time. And my wife was close to tears, and my daughter as well. How do we channel this thing? And that's when I bumped into, Ruth Lynn was my friend from before, but when I was telling her about it, that's when the idea came up to actually, they said, well, don't get mad, get even. That sort of idea of trying to constructively do something. And that's how the book, the manual, was birthed. And we met.
For sharing. Thanks very much.
We met Dennis. We met Dennis Murray, and he was very kind, yeah. And that's how we became friends over that period, or associates.
Okay, so before you get into the book, it's clear that this incident traumatized your entire family. And what's important is that you are telling the story secondhand, because you weren't there at the time of your son going through this ordeal. But it's clearly affected you. It affected you then, and it seemed to be that it continues to affect you now. So I want to ask Dennis, you police officer or assistant chief constable with a long history in race relations and dealing with the police. You've heard what Adrian said the experiences were. What would you say about the conduct of the police? Do you empathize, can you, with the trauma that the family felt and continue to feel now? And what would be your advice as to how do we heal?
I think with this
incident, yeah.
I totally can understand how Adrian felt. I met with Adrian at the time, and talked through. His son didn't feel like he could talk at the time, and I talk about similar experiences that I've experienced throughout my police service. In that, I remember going to police training college. My sister's house was attacked, and they set fire to her gas meter, beat her up in a racist attack. And my brothers went up there to support her. And when the police came, all my brothers got arrested, and the offenders weren't arrested. They were charged. It went to court. All charges were eventually dropped, and eventually the real protagonist was convicted of racially aggravated offences. So you can imagine the battle I had when my family are saying to me, "Well, look, what's going on with this?" I think the police service is changing. It's not in the right place still. There's a lot of work to do. But actually now I've just come back today from the National Black Police Association, where they talk about the internal experiences of officers and staff from Black, Asian and minority groups. And they're and the same conversation happening about the trauma of the experiences that they've had that are negative. So I think the good thing out of that conversation is, for the first time in the 32 years that I've been around, the police service is making the link between its operational activity and trauma and the long-term effects of that. What do I think is the solution going forward? Actually, the police service has got to get better at this, and the race action plan talks about, with data, you need to be able to explain your data or reform it. And many forces the IOPC have identified cannot explain their data and why it's disproportionate. But then the other thing is that they need to do this with the community. They can't do it on their own. One of the biggest issues out of all of this is around the lack of trust. And actually, if you've not got trust in the policing tactics, why would anyone come forward and want to join the police organisation from a minority background? Because the two are so intrinsically linked. If people aren't thriving that join the organisation, if the culture's wrong, then if the culture's wrong inside the police service, it's going to be wrong when they go out and deliver the services externally. And when people see that, they're going to go, well, I don't trust that. Why do I want to join that service? So the race action plan seeks to reconcile some of that. I certainly, leading for the Thames Valley side of it, I'm making sure that it is absolutely open to community scrutiny, and those communities that are most affected by the powers that are being used, we shouldn't be marking our own homework. We should be opening ourselves up as a police service so that the public can get involved and help us to get this right. The days of saying things like, well, the person looked suspicious when the police car drove past and, they had their hands in their pockets and their hood up, is not reasonable grounds. It's not. And of course people are nervous because they're getting searched when there's actually no reason to search them. So I think there's a sporadic...
Yeah. I want to take you, because in limitations of time, I want to take you back to Adrian's incident, because whereas from your experience, you had some success in terms of the outcome, Adrian went back, he went to the IOPC, he went to the Black Police Officers Association, and he got no joy. So, that is in itself traumatic. The trauma continues because it's heaped upon the indignity that his son suffered. And so one question in all of this, and I'm sure lots of listeners and viewers would want to hear from you about this, because there seems to be a particular interest of police officers in strip searching Black men, young Black men. The question arises as to whether there's some voyeurism on the part of the police with this particular power that they have. Apart from the humiliation, it seems they want to see the Black man's anatomy. What do you say about that? Do you think have you heard anything in the force about this particular area? And do you think it's a valid feeling on behalf of the Black community?
Well, I think the data's there to support that feeling because there is disproportionality throughout the whole criminal justice system. So we know that disproportionality is there for people stopped and searched, for vehicle stops, for people that are arrested, for people that are charged, for people that are convicted and get a harder, more stringent sentence. Part of the work that Adrian and I talked about when I met with him was actually, and the reason I insisted that I wanted to meet with every person who made a complaint about this from a Black, Asian or minority community that made a complaint to the police service when I was in that post. And I met with Adrian to say, actually, how can you help me to get this right? Because actually bringing in people that haven't got lived experience, that haven't seen the negative side of it, will come in and not understand this. So when Adrian came and was speaking to me and talking about writing this book, giving kids the ability to know their rights, that's all the things that I think are absolutely vital in this. If you look in Milton Keynes, we know that in Milton Keynes there's been 5 murders within the Somalian community in the last year. We're now working with the community in Milton Keynes. We've got a developed community plan where we're working together to resolve these issues. That is the only way forward. And whilst there isn't the trust there as it stands at the minute, that trust will come if we can get this right.
Okay, so thank you. So you talked about education. You were pleased that Adrian was prepared to have a conversation with you on this issue. So you seem to also allude to the fact that it's necessary for us to educate ourselves about stop and search so that we can effectively communicate with you in this dialogue that we want to heal the national community. So I'm going to bring in Ruth now to tell us about the book, the contents of the book, and some of the areas the book covers. Now, it's a small book, it's a handbook. And for myself, as a barrister, as a former prosecutor, I know stop and search is a vast amount of law, lots of legislation, lots of regulations, lots of case law. And so it's a very complex area. And so how did you go about the task of condensing this complex area into a handbook that would be effective in terms of educating young people to engage with the police?
Right. Excellent question. It was a labour of love, Calvin, because when we first started, we thought, how do we actually bring everything together? Because there's like 26 laws and pieces of laws enacted. And we thought, let's be succinct. Let's give the BEAM community what they need to have at hand when they actually go into a situation or a space with the police. So Adrian and I will look through the police, the police code of ethics. We looked through the METS data. We looked at different books, and we went about getting doing a lot of research to collate all the information together. We looked at graphs and stats and all of that. But what we wanted was something to empower and motivate our young people to know that there's someone that's got their back. You know, Denny spoke about his experience, Adrian spoke about his, and every time Adrian speaks about his situation, I'm vicariously traumatized every single time. So imagine the listeners now, I don't know how many are online, but you've got another set of people traumatized by someone that they don't even know. So this book is for, if you look in the disclaimer, it's for people who have not committed a crime. Because as Denny said, people who are stopped and searched, they don't find anything. They are not criminals. And we won't go back to what you mentioned, but the voyeurism, that's another topic. That would be a whole show. So we went about just getting all the data from the police themselves. What better to go to the organ grinder? So we went to their documents, their research, their code of ethics, their police oath, and we looked at how our own community could actually come together and bring the book to life by defending ourselves, looking after ourselves. But it's about having that cohesiveness and just gelling together as a community. And the book is for that. It's a handbook that they can carry with them. It's got anecdotes, it's got poetry, it's got a lot of wonderful things in there to make it easy to read. And it wasn't just for the pedestrian, as in, the people on foot stop and search, because normally when our young men, they grow, they want to get a car. So it's got information in there on vehicle stop and search as well. But we did go straight to the police and their words, and we brought the book together like that.
Does the book contain any advice for parents for, when they get news that their child has been arrested? Does it give them any advice as to where to go to seek legal assistance from a solicitor, for a barrister, or does it contain information that will tell them how do they get to know where the child is taken to, which police station?
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because even the child, when they're trying to get the information from the police, they're very reticent to give the information. I've heard, people in videos ask the police for their collar number and their warrant, the information on their warrant card, and they said, I don't have to give it to you. Sometimes it's difficult, and that's why in the A.K.I.P book we've got a notes page, so they can record that I did ask the police for their details and they denied us having the details. So it's about the police collaborating with the person that they are stopping searching. But we have got a glossary of useful contacts, of which you are one as a senior barrister. So we've got a lot of useful contacts for them to go and to address the issues and the police stations. And sometimes, like Tristan, he wasn't even in his area to even know where to go, and the police were not giving them the details. So that's something that does need to be addressed by the police themselves, because they may have their police oath, which they are definitely not adhering to, and it's under king and country now because Her Majesty's passed away. So it's for them to look at what their police oath and their police code of and their police commitment and promise, and get the police to actually do what they say on the tin. but they're not doing that. Hence, the stop and search, it's going on at an alarming rate, even with all the laws and everything going on and the sections and all of that. They are still not doing what they've promised to do and what we are actually paying them for.
Because they're there to protect and serve the community.
They are there to protect and serve, but they're not protecting and serving. They are actually stopping and searching.
Yeah. So tell me, you said that the book is for law-abiding people, but don't you think it would be helpful to people who've committed the law, so that they can educate themselves as to how to approach the police or how to engage with the police, in the future when they may be stopped and searched again? And I'm
Of
going to
course,
ask
the
you
book
to
is.
answer very briefly.
Yes, briefly, the book really is for everyone, whether you've committed a crime before or not, and the police shouldn't base your stop and search on previous knowledge or previous intelligence that you've committed a crime. Every day is a new day. So the book is for anyone who wants to know about the police and their oath and their promises and how they can actually conduct themselves in a stop and search with the police. So it doesn't matter if you're a criminal or not, but it's more for the innocent ones. But anyone can use it: parents, teachers, barristers. The police need to read this book themselves, because forewarned is forearmed.
Yeah, and it could be facilitative of the conversation that you would wish to have with the police and for the community to
Absolutely.
have with the police.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, Calvin, you're right.
So illustrations and little sort of interesting quotes. I understand that you were the creator of these illustrations. So tell us briefly about that.
The illustrations in the book, in the
Yes.
manual. It seemed important to us to actually break up the writing, because there's writing and there's reference to laws and government and police code of ethics and all of this sort of thing. And in this era now, the concentration span is not like it was before. Most young people are online and they're looking at snippets and short things like TikTok and different things like that. So we thought it was important to make it readable, so that it didn't distract them when they see loads and loads and loads of writing. So the idea of putting the cartoons in and to make them humorous was an attempt to engage them at different levels in their focus. And one thing that is most important about this, in terms of law, as Ruthlin said, there are many laws. There's so much to read. It would be unrealistic to expect teenagers or parents to read everything. And we've got to understand that the police don't always know the whole entirety of the law and the depth of it. And sometimes that has been their advantage, because the young people know even less. And so what has happened in the past and continues to happen, an innocent pedestrian can be moved from being an innocent pedestrian to a suspect and then to a criminal, because he doesn't understand the law. He gets tied up in the situation. He becomes angry. And then he creates a situation whereby the police who have apprehended him have justification for taking the matter further. And so we feel it's important that they understand their rights, and they understand that they have a right to video the incident, and the police as well. From the moment they suspect someone, they should be putting on their body-worn cameras, so that you've got independent evidence of the situation. And so you're not making an innocent pedestrian or driver from a suspect to becoming a criminal under the reasons that they have to stop and search and apprehend and even handcuff.
So that gives me a good segue into asking Dennis. Dennis, there are commentary by and observations and findings by some watchdogs, the College of Policing and Her Majesty's Inspectorate for the Fire, Constabulary and Rescue Services. And they're saying authoritatively that the police do not fully understand the stop and search laws and how to implement them. And also that the forces should give more attention in terms of educating the police themselves as to the application of the law. What do you say about that? In terms of you and your colleagues are said to at times unlawfully acting in your engagement with the police, with the public, in terms of stop and search. So, are the watchdogs incorrect? Do you agree with their findings? And what would you do as an assistant chief constable in your area, or with your fellow brother police officers? What would you advocate for change?
So I think the first thing is that I think Adrian's absolutely right. Every officer should have their body worn video on when they're recording things. I think in relation to this, the IOPC, the Spotlight report on stop and search, all identified disproportionality and reasonable grounds being used in very different ways. So, and I think it was alluded to there around historic intelligence being used when, unless it's coupled with other things, doesn't give you the reasonable grounds. So I think there are some forces and some individual officers who get this right, and there are others who don't get it right, which causes the issue, because actually nobody tells the good news stories. It's the bad news stories that kind of spread far and wide. So if I talk about what I've done when I left BTP, BTP are now in a position where they fully understand their data. They can tell you who's been stopped, where they've been stopped, what secondary outcomes they had, was it linked to a particular incident, which officers are stopping people and finding what they were looking for, which officers are stopping people and not finding what they were looking for, so that they can partner them up with someone who's doing it properly and have that learning process. The race action plan, and I don't know which communities the people that are listening to this for, every force in the country has to have a race action plan. And within that race action plan is a whole element on police use of powers and stop and search, where forces have to revise and look at the way they are using their powers. And if they're not right, they need to be fixing it and fixing it with the community. So if you are not involved in that, if you haven't seen your force's race action plan, seek it out, see what your force is writing within its plan, try and get involved if you can. They are looking for people from black communities because the plan is aimed at the black community, and in an acknowledgement that the black community is probably the most affected by this. Yes, the Asian community and others are, but the black community has suffered the most, and that's why the plan focuses on that, because actually we are on a journey, and I'm resolute that, and I specifically asked for when I took this role to be in charge of the race action plan because I want to see it different from when I joined 30 years ago.
Yeah.
The police service is making progress, but that progress needs to be much faster than it is now.
But you say they're making progress. But today,
Yes,
yes,
yep.
I agree with you. In some respects, they're making progress. And to let the community know that I'll be joining you as chairman of the Independent Scrutiny Board for Thames Valley in due course. But we heard today, despite your advocacy that the police are making progress, we've heard today reported conduct by police officers that are reprehensible in terms of the WhatsApp group sharing derogatory information about politicians, black members of the public, similar to what happened with Charing Cross. So, how do you reconcile the progress you're making with the continuation of this reprehensible behavior on the part of some police officers?
So I think part of that is, and again, it is built into the race action plan, that there is a whole element on the professional standards of officers and staff. So people behaving in a way that is inappropriate and actually on occasion unlawful is zero tolerance. You know, it should not be tolerated, and every force has got to have a really strong position on this. That whilst each case will be based on its own merits, a clear line in the sand that this sort of behaviour will not be tolerated, and we do not want people like that to be part of the police service. And I certainly think, from my point of view, if you look at the race action plan for Thames Valley, we will be the first force in the country to set up the exact same standard of scrutiny as the national race action plan. That's how important this is. But we shouldn't be alone. Every force in the country should be building this in to make sure that we deliver this plan, and it isn't tick box. You know, the Home Secretary's come out and said a lot of the police diversity initiatives are tick box. This can't be tick box. It should be about policing by consent and the way that we do business, and the findings of those plans becomes the way we do business as normal. This situation can't go on. It has to change, because actually all of these people saying these things, it means we're not getting it right, and actually we
And the
need to get
figures,
it
you
right.
say we're not getting it right, and the figures speak for themselves. Because the
Yeah.
figures say in, let's say, one particular year, maybe 577,000 stop and search events were conducted. And only approximately 14, 15, or maybe 20% of those stop and search events were led to further action. So it means maybe 450,000 stop and search events were not, uh, I should say, valid. And so it means that the police are spending a lot of time unnecessarily stopping and traumatizing Black people. And as a consequence of that, you aren't getting the buy-in with the support that they should be giving you in terms of fighting crime and catching criminals. So how would you say, and very briefly, because we only have a 9 more minutes, how would you say that the police should go about recalibrating the allocation of their time to deal
So
more
yeah,
importantly with serious crimes such as burglary or thefts or robberies, rather than stopping people unnecessarily on the streets across the country?
well, I think the first thing is that the use of powers needs to be targeted. So if you have, for example, and I've seen this in many forces, there's been a shooting, we're going to authorize a Section 60 search. The reality is an officer going to go and search someone if they think they've got a gun on them, or are they going to deploy firearms officers? So sometimes these powers are used as just the standard roll off the shelf type activity that then drives disproportionality. Forces need to get more sophisticated with this. They need to be able to explain their data, because whilst you say X amount didn't find anything, actually what you'll find is, from the research that I've done, they probably have found things, but they can't explain it. So they might not have found the knife they were looking for, but that person was missing, or they were being targeted by county lines, or they were linked to criminality. But at the minute, many forces just measure, did we find something or didn't we find something? So the figures look really skewed. And when the public ask, well, why did you do that many searches? They can't explain it. And then that looks really, really bad to the community, because they say, well, look at all these searches and you found nothing. You can't demonstrate you've safeguarded someone. You can't demonstrate that that person was wanted for another offence. That's why the race action plan talks about explain your data or reform it. And there isn't a choice. You have to be in a position to be able to do that. And that's the journey that the forces are on at the moment.
And well, that's good to hear. And the race action plan with the full involvement of the Thames Valley community, would be able to hold you and your colleagues in the force accountable for your actions to bring about the necessary change. So can I go back
Exactly.
to Ruth and Adrian? Ruth, when would the book be available, and where do you get it? And but before that, you answer that: is the book updatable? Because you know the law changes. And so, are you making any arrangements to ensure that the book stays current and valuable to the people to whom it's directed?
Yeah. Adrian, you want to do that, and I'll take the next question.
I think in terms of making the book available, we're in a process at the moment. It's we've completed it, and we want to get it proofread by a certain appropriate people, yourself being one, legal people, lawyers, and also parents, but more importantly, teenagers themselves. Because apart, if they don't understand it, then it's been a waste of time. our perception as to what is good for them. They need to actually look at it and positively or constructively criticize it, so then we can ameliorate it and amend that which needs to be amended to make it most accessible and useful for them. Thing is, Chief Dennis Murray, he said, policing by consent. We've got to change a perception out there that something happens that's not right, and then what the police do, they come into the community and get some Kipling cakes and a cup of tea and get the community back on board again and feel that everything's all right and something's going to be done. We need a real change. And I think, moving from somewhere between Dixon of Dock Green and Wayne Couzens, from the ideal to the worst type of policeman, somewhere in the middle. I mean, it takes in all the different types of humanity and individuals, and they need to be weeded out so that the force can be trusted. And it's not just policing by consent, but policing by people actually trusting the police. And we haven't reached that point yet.
No,
There's a very long way to go with that. But can I ask you, are you intending to use any focus groups to develop the book, to know the responses from the book, to see how it plays out in the community?
Yeah. And your first question was, is it updatable? Everything's updatable. Police laws are updatable, so, and even the book itself can be updatable, but for now we just want to get it out, get people reading it. We've got focus groups, we've got parents, we've got people who are drivers who are reading it, as Adrian mentioned. We've got the law people, we've got lawyers and barristers, we've got teens, we've got both genders reading it. And I think it's important that we get a whole cohort of people reading it, and it's not just about young boys. Right? So I'm looking at fathers, because parents are traumatized. Adrian's wife and daughter, his family were traumatized. I was traumatized by it. Everyone that hears about Adrian's story is traumatized. And you know what, Calvin? I believe that the police use their police language or police speak as a weapon. With Adrian's case, what did they say? The police have nothing to answer to. And that is their pat answer, and that is not good enough, because now you've left a young man hating the police, and they're begging for help now because I think they're out of their depth in that they've used stop and search impunitively, and not only that, it's like it's an addiction. I'm kind of bored today. What should we do? Let's go and find someone to stop and search. It doesn't make sense. The color of your skin should not make you be stopped and searched at a disproportionate rate to other people. I think it's an addiction that.
Sorry. There are good police officers, most definitely, and we think Dennis Murray is one. But the thing is, that reality is not as important as perception. Perception is in this world. Perception is the only thing that matters. The reality could be totally different, and the perception of the police has got to change, and that can only change when the action on the ground is changed, and that's what the A.K.I.P book has been designed to try to do.
And so that perception is also backed up by empirical data that validates the need for a book like yours. And so it's a good way to end the program. I want to thank you, Ruth South. I want to thank you, Adrian Roberts, and also Assistant Chief Constable Dennis Murray, for coming and sharing your views on a very difficult topic. What we've raised here are several areas that need to be discussed in more depth, and that's what we're going to be doing over the course of the next weeks and months on this platform. So thank you again for coming, and I wish you success with the book, wish you continued success, Dennis, in your career and your involvement with the community, and hopefully we can get going a national conversation that will bring about the necessary healing that's required across the entire country. Because if this continues and people are alienated from assisting the police, people are traumatized because of what the actions taken by the police, then a whole swathe of the national community would not be involved in the national discourse in making the country a better place. So we are hoping, let's be optimistic for success, and we'll continue this conversation. So we want to thank our viewers and our listening audiences across the country and in some countries around the world. And we look forward to further discussions with you in the near future. Thank you and goodbye.